Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Borden. We've talked about in the past the power of discussions in online courses, what that can look like, maybe should look like. I want to unpack a couple of those ideas much more specifically here to augment and support some of the stuff that we've discussed in the past. So I've presented blogs and videos about how problematic it can be to start to try to use groups in classroom settings, not just online, in all classroom settings. We often do these silly little exercises like you're on a boat that's sinking and you have to get some of the people on the boat in the life raft, but not everybody in the life raft. And we put people on the moon and say to rank order something based on a NASA list. And those exercises are really feeble. They're disingenuous, they're not realistic or authentic to people. People know that they're not on a boat, that they're not on the moon. And so these critical thinking applications really are very, very weak. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to online discussions, we often seem to follow suit with that. So aside from the obvious no-nos in online discussions, you don't want to ask a question that has a close-ended question. That's an obvious one. We often leave our conversations in our classrooms with something like this. You've read something, or I've shown you a video, or I've made a statement as the instructor, and now I just want you to tell me how you feel. Tell me how that looks in your life. Tell me how you have effectively taken that information in and digested it and done something with it. Well, that also is not necessarily an enjoyable experience for most college students or participants in an online class. Why? Well, they're not necessarily hearing from other experts. They're sometimes hearing ideas and concepts that are completely and utterly meaningless to the conversation. They're wrong. And so why waste your time with things from non-experts that could be wrong when you're really here to learn information? And so just asking people how you feel about something or how you digest something, that's not necessarily an excellent online practice. It's better than the alternative of the closed-ended question, but it really is not terribly engaging. So I've given a few thoughts over time about how we can start to affect some change in our discussions to make them better. And so there's some definite process things you can do, word counts, minimums, but also maximums, so that people are not writing 7 paragraphs and expecting others to read it. They're learning to synthesize themselves and stuff like that. That's as ineffective and non-impactful when someone writes 7 paragraphs as when they just write LOL or I agree. At the same time, I ask my students to always respond to a certain number of topics, but in the way that they respond, it needs to be credible, it needs to be cited, it needs to actually have some supporting evidence based on the textbook, based on my information that I provided, my presentations, or stuff that they found online. That's all fine. They have a certain number of those responses that they have to give to their peers, but those responses have to be constructive. They cannot simply be slapping someone on the back saying, oh, I agree with everything you said. It's all perfect. It's all magic. Because again, the student is a novice. They're not supposed to be perfect. They're not supposed to have all of the understanding. So the idea is to get students to start to critically analyze those statements and say, oh, I agree with some of it, but I don't agree with all of it. And then as they start to go through this, they have a conversation. I require that they respond by a certain time, a certain day, so that it's a conversation. It's not just a place where I post a thought that says you're wrong and then I leave. I actually now engage in a conversation with my peers, and hopefully we start to develop some learning community. And then I also require that they read all of my posts, because quite often the participants' posts are similar, and I don't need to go in and respond to every single post that's the same with the same response. That's actually a bad practice. Instead, I try to have a conversation with individual students, and then hopefully if the other students or other participants have watched what I've said, they start to engage in that dialogue as well, knowing that they thought the same thing or they made the same mistake or whatever it might be. And then finally, we conclude the conversation at some point, we wrap it up, and we sort of put a bow on it, and then we move on. Now, that process is very, very helpful. You can do a lot of things in discussions with that process. I've shown you how you can use do first in discussions very effectively online. That concept of generative learning is something where you can say, try this, do this, watch this, experience this first. try to accomplish this thing that requires algorithms you don't know how to use yet, or whatever. Please go back and check out some of my blogs and some of my videos about do first learning. But you can do that in a discussion. But actually, you can do a lot in a discussion. There are a lot of different teaching activities, teaching assets, if you will, that you can leverage in an online discussion. I love leveraging things like devil's advocate in discussions, having students be subject matter experts in discussions, utilizing office hours with discussions, gamified experiences with discussions, video reactions in discussions. I leverage discussions quite heavily in my classes. Why? Because it's engaging, it's active. These students actually have to formulate thoughts and considerations, and they have to work them out with each other as I watch and help and guide and facilitate. Or they have to react to something that I've said when I've said something that was particularly conflictual, or something that they don't necessarily buy into, or something that is on purpose, something that is difficult to swallow. Then we can have a conversation. I can start to see what they've really gleaned from the materials, what they've taken in from the textbook, from my presentations, from outside sources, and we can have a really good conversation. So let me unpack how all of that starts to work together in regard to learning community. And when I think about learning community, I think about three things. I think about peer review, I think about peer collaboration, and I think about conflict. And as those three things kind of come together, I think it's important for us to have an intentional strategy, intentional plan, so that we can make our online experience just as impactful and effective as we often feel those face-to-face experiences to be. In fact, this can actually inform both. So first of all, when it comes to creating a response, whether that's a response to me and my topic, or a response to another student, I demand that my students utilize outside supporting evidence. I actually have said to students in general, not a specific student, you're not an expert. I'm sorry. I know that your opinion is valued as you've grown up. Sometimes, we look at different generations and how they're told that everything they do is magic. That doesn't mean they're always right. That doesn't mean they have information that is based on experience, or based on experimentation, or based on research. They just have opinions. And some people think I just want to share my opinion because my opinion means everything. But it doesn't mean everything. In fact, sometimes it means nothing, because their opinion can be wrong. And so I require my participants in professional development scenarios, I require my students in my classrooms to actually cite sources, to use evidence, to say, here's what I think, but I want to bolster that and support it with this expert out there who has done something, seen something, researched something, etc. That support becomes crucial. So that way it's not just, well, I believe this, well, I don't believe that, I believe something else. I don't care. What can you prove? What can you say is more true than just your perception? And how can you prove that to us? So credibility becomes a really important part of peer review, of peer collaboration. It gives people a leg to stand on. Now, with that said, I do ask that my students criticize one another. In fact, I require it. They actually have to say, I don't agree with everything that has been said here. I don't mind the supportive comments, and those are easy. Everyone likes to do that in non-anonymous settings. Notice when you give them an anonymity, people are happy to criticize. Go look at social media platforms and you'll see people lambasting one another. But as soon as they have to put their name to it, well, now they don't want to criticize anyone. Criticizing is a part of critical thinking. It's a part of problem solving. It's a part of saying, hey, I don't think that all of what you said is right, and let me go research it to see if I can prove it. Oh, yes, I can prove it. Here's the research that backs it up. So that's really, really important that those critical elements be supported, again, just like we talked about in the first component of peer review, that they be supported by credible statements, by arguments that actually are credible and supported. If that's happening, you will see far, far less conflict. But of course, when you start asking people to criticize, you are going to have some conflict. So let's talk about three strategies that there are for conflict, especially in an online class and an online discussion. First of all, you want to make sure that you make it clear from the beginning. And when I say make it clear, I mean actually state this explicitly, that your classroom is a safe space. It is a place for people to expand on ideas, expound on ideas, to try things out in terms of what they think may or may not be accurate or true or researched or cited or credible or whatever. That's okay. It's okay for people to make mistakes. In fact, you hope that they do make some mistakes. If nobody makes a mistake, well, quite honestly, then why are you there? Just give them the book and let them go not make mistakes in their life. But that's not how teaching is supposed to work. Teaching is about looking at things that need adjusting, correcting, those sorts of things. So we want to create a safe place for constructive criticism. That means that when someone is overly critical, hypercritical, that there are times we will have to step in. There are times that we will have to say, whoa, that was inappropriate. There have been times, not many, but there have been times I've had to come to the rescue of some students who another student really came in and said, you're stupid. That's a horrible idea. I can't believe that you would say that. It doesn't happen often, but it on occasion has happened. So you want to make very clear that this is a safe space. At that, the second sort of step in that is to then say, all right, after I've taken that crucial conversation and shown the class that I'm going to support people in terms of that safety, then sometimes you do have to take it offline. You have to say to the student, look, you and I need to have a phone call, or we have to have an instant messaging chat, or whatever that looks like. Come to my office if you have the physical space for that. Whatever it looks like, there are times that you can't have this play out in front of the rest of the group. Because not only do you want to make it safe for the person that was attacked in the first place, you also want to make it safe for the attacker and say, you know, what you did was not appropriate. There are times, again, I've had to do this over the 22 years of teaching, that the student said, oh, that was not my intention at all. I didn't mean to offend. I wasn't trying to be confrontational. And so they have then gone back and made apologies, made amends inside of the classroom. And it's turned out to be quite a lovely experience, actually, both for them and for the rest of the class. But there are times you do have to take it offline, and that's okay. But then let me give you an actual strategy for those discussions that can really be employed with students who seem to be struggling with what their peers are saying. With those students who seem to think that they're sort of above the fray, above it all, because the rest of their students aren't thinking properly or correctly. I love to ask those students to be the subject matter expert of the week, or the subject matter expert of the discussion, for them to run based on the textbook information, my presentations, but also then whatever they believe their own expertise to be. I like to have them facilitate the conversation. Now, in doing that, some interesting things come up. I can play devil's advocate on both sides of any issue. I can support the subject matter expert who's facilitating the discussion. I can support the student who's asked the question of the subject matter expert. I can really start to come in and guide, mold, shape, and facilitate the conversation. And I'll tell you, having done this a handful of times with students who kind of had that air of superiority to them, it's worked every time. They seem to really like stepping into that leadership role. They like the spotlight or the attention, the admonition that I'm saying, okay, you've got a little bit more credibility than most. But at the same time, they seem to always learn and understand that there's more to it than just knowledge, that there's more to it than just belief or perception, that other people come to the table with questions that are hard to answer, that are deep, that are thought-provoking, that are tangential. And now they have to try to wrangle all that and make sense of it. And first of all, they have a newfound respect often for my position as the facilitator of the class. But second, they often learn a newfound respect for their peers. And it really does create a learning community where you've got someone with a little bit more expertise that can share that with others. And they start to learn themselves how to manage that, how to handle that expertise as they go. So I hope that you see that there are some really impactful and effective ways that we can begin to guide and help learning communities build through peer review, peer feedback, and dealing with conflict effectively. Good luck, and good learning.